Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Paul Tisik, for the invitation, Nate specifically for coordinating, and the rest of the colleagues. And also thanks to Alina and Alina for presenting their ideas about human in the loop and human in the lead. I think my presentation kind of segues well with what they presented because they have already presented a very good and solid background and structure for using artificial intelligence in item generation. What I'm presenting today is about automated assessment generation, which is a little bit of an extension of the idea of item generation. And I should also add that this is from, as I have mentioned in my abstract, it's based on some ideas that I have included in my book, which is a Routledge volume called Listening Assessment in the Age of Generative Artificial Intelligence. I'm hoping that it will come out this year. So I'll keep you updated if it comes out this year. Here is an outline of my presentation. I will start off by talking about the attributes of listening assessment. Then I will talk about generative artificial intelligence in brief. Then I move on to generative AI in developing listening assessments. And then I will talk about generative AI in developing a conversational AI system. And whenever I don't have enough time, I'll just refer you to some works which has already been published and is available already out there. So let's get started with the first part of my presentation. Remember that I want to present a case for developing listening assessments and oral communication or oral interaction assessments using generative artificial intelligence. Let's say you are a teacher and you want to develop a listening assessment to use in your classes. There are basically two types of features or two groups of attributes that you're supposed to take into account in order to make sure that your test is authentic. One of them is the attribute of auditory input, and the other one is the attributes of textual input. And these are non-exhaustive lists. In the book, I have unpacked them and I have explained them in far more detail. One of the first things that comes into mind when you want to develop your listening assessment, the auditory material of the listening assessment is the effect of accent on the comprehensibility of the auditory message. If the accent is not very familiar, then the test taker or the learner might encounter some problems comprehending the message. That's just one side of the story. Another part of the story is the fact that the accents that are covered on the test should represent and cover the accents in a bigger domain, which is called the target language use domain, TLU for short, because we always want to emulate or kind of generalize from our assessments to that TLU domain. So our tests would be accurate, and the test scores, their meanings and their the interpretations and uses of those test scores will be accurate to the extent that your test or your assessment represents that bigger domain that is the TLU domain, in this case, in terms of the accent coverage. The speed of speech delivery is important. As you can imagine, if someone speaks too fast, it may be very difficult for people to understand them. Authenticity is another attribute that we should take into account. Authenticity traditionally has been defined in terms of the correspondence between your assessment and the TLU domain in various levels. In this context, I specifically am referring to the features of spoken language, which include assimilation, elision, and so on and so forth. Elvis Wagner has done quite a lot of interesting studies about this, so I leave it there. And since we're increasingly using generative AI in order to develop inputs for our assessments, the emerging question, in my view, would be whether or to what extent the AI-generated input can be considered authentic. That's another question to keep in mind. I have talked about it in details and I've presented some data and evidence in the book about whether or to what extent this kind of input can be regarded as authentic. Now, there's another factor which is called key, which is unfortunately very underrepresented in listening assessment, which refers to the tone, the manner, or spirit in which a particular message is conveyed. which sets the mood or the emotional undertone of the communication. It comes from the speaking model proposed by Delheims before 1972, but after 1972, the speaking model was basically revamped, and he used the term communicative competence. For example, you want to tell a story about some which comprises of some characters like a wolf, like a sheep. The way that you want to imitate the character of the wolf in your voice or the character of the sheep, that's the key. And then the voice is also important. The other side of the story is attributes of textual input. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. This comprises of, for example, features of the written items. For example, if we decide to use multiple choice questions compared with open-ended questions, that can affect several things. One of them is the authenticity of the test. I think that's the most important question that we as teachers or test developers should always be thinking about. The other one is the thought processes of test takers or assessment takers. And we need to think about whether there will be a correspondence between the thought processes of these people under assessment conditions and non-assessment conditions. If there is no good correlation between these two cognitive processes under the two conditions, I'm afraid our test is suffering from lack of what Buckman and Palmer called interactiveness, what Cyril Weir and John Field have called cognitive validity, and there are a lot of different names for it, but basically it refers to the correspondence between the thought processes of test takers under the two conditions that I mentioned. Topic of the text is very important. In two papers, my colleagues and I have discussed this in details. A very recent publication just came out in language testing. My former student, Yufan Zhao, and myself looked into it through some automatized semantic analysis. Another paper was published in Applied Linguistics. Some of you might have already seen it. These two papers talk about topics, among other things. Lexical diversity and sophistication is another important factor in designing your assessment. You need to take into account how diverse the lexical and how sophisticated the lexical items are. Traditionally, we use computational linguistics, such as indices such as measure of textual lexical diversity or the type token ratio and so on and so forth. But the caveat is that all of these indices were developed for written text rather than spoken text. Again, in the book, I have presented some kind of preliminary solution to this perennial problem. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into details. So hopefully, when the book is published and some of you are interested, you can take a look. And the other thing in lexical diversity and sophistication, which has been used in previous research, and some studies have used it even in listening assessment, is to what extent academic vocabulary is used, because when the ratio of academic vocabulary increases, the technical aspect of the text and also the cognitive challenge for listeners will also increase. Then we've got the question of syntactic complexity and also the formality level, which we need to take into account. Now, let's keep this framework in mind and think about how generative artificial intelligence can help us develop a test of listening comprehension, including and by controlling for or manipulating the aspects that I just have gone through. A bit of a introduction to generative AI, I think, is useful here. I'm sure all of us have heard about foundation models, large language models, generative artificial intelligence. Let's take a step back and look at the predecessor of foundation models, natural language processing, or NLP for short. NLP refers to computational methods that are designed to process and analyze human language, natural human language. There are many different tasks that can be done through natural language processing, such as NLU, that's natural language understanding, NLG, or natural language generation, text-to-speech, or automated recognition, automated speech recognition, sentiment analysis, and a lot more. So there are different tasks that can be done with NLPs. There are different types of NLPs. The previous ones were more rule-based and statistical, whereas more recent NLPs are more robust in a sense because they have better prediction power. The error drops since they use deep learning, a kind of sophisticated artificial neural networks. If you want to do several tasks you have to develop several NLPs. So if you want to do 3 tasks, for example, NLU and NLG, then you typically need to develop an NLP for NLU and another NLP for doing an NLG. I hope these acronyms are not confusing. The whole point is every NLP is developed for doing one specific task. The fundamental question has always been the following. Is it possible to develop one NLP that has this foundational ability to conduct different tasks, which are otherwise conducted by separate NLPs? And luckily, relatively recently, the scientists, computer scientists specifically, have been able to answer that question. They have come up with the idea of foundation models. Foundation models refer to massive AI models that are trained on large data sets and can be adapted to a wide range of tasks. For example, you can do language tasks with them, all different kinds of language tasks. If you have used ChatGPT, you know what I mean. Even image processing, image generation, speech processing, speech generation, and so on and so forth. There's also the term generative AI, which is used as an overarching, I would say, less technical, less scientific terminology, but now it's used even by computer scientists. If you look at, for example, Scopus, you'll see that generative AI as a terminology has been used mostly after 2019, but before 2019, there is little trace of it on Scopus and even on Google. So I'm going to use all of these terms kind of interchangeably unless I state otherwise. Okay, so the question is, how can we use these generative AI models that can handle different tasks to develop a listening assessment? Here is what we did. And before that, there are several generative AI platforms that I usually use in my language assessment courses. I've also used these in the book. And there's a lot more than this. I just wanted to share these just in case you're a teacher and you're looking for a quick list of AI. Some of them are text-to-speech, some of them are multimodal, and so on and so forth. My favorite ones so far are Synthesia, 11 Labs, of course, ChatGPT. Okay, let's move on to the study. The study has already been published pretty recently in Computers and Education, Artificial Intelligence. If you like to access the paper, it's actually free. You can download it for free, and feel free to circulate it in your networks. And just scan this QR code, and you will be navigated towards the paper. In this study, we did quite a few things. I want to highlight 2 objectives that we wanted to fulfill. Number 1 is to create scripts, and number 2, we wanted to create tasks. In creating scripts, we aim to change the difficulty of the texts as well as the linguistic features of the text, not manually really, but to get an AI to do it for us. And also we wanted to change the text type, for example, argumentative text type versus comparison and contrast and so on and so forth. And then we created texts. So let's look at some of the things that we did and also some of the results that we achieved. In order to prompt ChatGPT 4, we used a method that is called progressive hint prompting. In this method, we utilized the previous replies that ChatGPT provided us to the first reply as hints, and then adjusted the following prompt iteratively to achieve a desirable output gradually. Once we got where we were, we just fixed that and continued to use that sort of prompt with ChatGPT, and actually it was pretty useful for us. There were a few steps to create text. First of all, we created a reference corpus, and that's what I suggest if you really want to take your assessment development seriously, and if you have some time and you don't have anything better to do, it's better to create a reference corpus. And then you can ask ChatGPT or any other platforms that you're using through, for example, PHP prompting, to tailor the level of difficulty and linguistic challenge of each of the texts one by one to different people. Now, we had 3 imagined populations in mind. One was low proficiency level, the other one was intermediate proficiency level, and the last one was university students in academic English courses or programs. Naturally, we expected that the output would be significantly different across these 4 levels of ability, or 4 levels of, let's say, potential cognitive load. So let's see what we got. here is the results of our computational linguistics analysis. We used cometrics. For example, we compared lexical diversity, syntactic complexity, and readability of the texts. Again, I should say that, well, remember that this is scripts for listening texts, so readability might not be the best thing to do, but even readability showed that the four corpora that we had generated, including the reference corpora, were significantly different in terms of lexical diversity and as well as syntactic complexity, as very clearly shown by the effect size, which we measured using the partial eta squared values. So it generated three corpora, which were significantly different from each other in terms of the difficulty level and the linguistic challenges of the text. We read the text and we were pretty happy with the quality and the input of the text. As you know, since quite a few months ago, the amount of confabulation or hallucination, if you will, of especially ChatGPT 4 and 4.0 has decreased quite significantly. I don't know if you have noticed that. I personally have noticed that a lot, especially in my recent chats with it. So we moved on to the second goal of the study to address it, and it consisted of creating tasks and figuring out whether the tasks are well designed or not. We went with two different tasks, which are commonly used in listening assessment. One of them is the good old multiple choice questions, which everybody loves, and unfortunately, they're very non-authentic in a sense. We found out that ChatGPT can create stems of multiple choice questions pretty well. Actually, they were flawless. We didn't have anything else to add, or we didn't want to really tweak it or streamline them. They were pretty fine. But when it comes to the options, I'm afraid it constantly failed to create options almost without no exception. One of the problems that we found was that it writes options. It can listen to you. For example, it changes the length of the options. Sometimes the options are too long and you can ask it, okay, can you shorten the length and so on. It listens to you, it generates it for you. But the problem is most of these options can be either eliminated, or if they're the correct answer, they can be chosen without you having to listen to the auditory stimuli. And that's a bad item, in short. So multiple choice questions can be generated, specifically the stem of the multiple choice questions, but for the rest of them, you have to really do the heavy lifting. I mean, the rest of it refers to the options. Now, we also asked ChatGPT to generate open-ended tasks. In short, it did a really good and satisfactory job. It generated tasks, it generated exemplars. If you're a teacher and you want to use exemplars, it's really useful, especially for those of you who are in the business of rater training, or you have to train some raters who are working with you at some school and so on. It can create exemplars which are pretty useful. So in general, open-ended questions were designed pretty fine, but multiple choice questions were not 100% satisfactory. Now I'm going to move on to the attributes of the audio input. You can also change the attributes of audio input depending on the target language use domain that you have in mind and the needs or the purposes of your assessment. Here, I'm going to just present three samples actually, of the audio that has been generated by two AIs here. One is Murph AI and the other one is 11 Labs. I suggest that you turn up the volume of your computer so you can hear them. The first one is this. They're going to read this text, and they're using text-to-speech technology. There we go. The first one.
Agriculture has been a fundamental aspect of human civilization for thousands of years. It is the process of cultivating land, raising animals, and producing food and other products for human consumption. Agriculture has been the backbone of many economies.
Okay, I hope you heard it. So to me, it's satisfactory, although it's not perfect 100%. Well, it's satisfactory, really. And then English is called India. By the way, a disclaimer here, I'm not sure if these terminologies are linguistically sound, but I'm just using the same terminology that is used on the website. So English, India here, we're going to listen to this one, the same text, but in just a matter of 1 second, you can change the accent of the speaker.
Agriculture has been a fundamental aspect of human civilization for thousands of years. It is the process of cultivating land, raising animals, and producing food and other products for human consumption. Agriculture?
It really matters if you choose an accent that your test takers like, or they don't like, or they hear a lot, or they don't hear that much. I played this to a group of teachers in Singapore, and when they heard English India, they loved it. They said, actually, we hear this sort of accent or similar accents around us. So it does sound authentic to us to a high extent compared with other accents which we tried. And they said, in a sense, they're not very authentic, well, authentic in quotation marks, because that's really just a perception of teachers that are using it. So this allows us to change different accents with exactly the same text, thanks to this text-to-speech technology. Now, 11 Labs is also another option for you to choose. This is going to be a different text, but I'm just going to play it to show you how 11 Lab works. It's by far one of my favorite text-to-speech platforms.
This next capability I'm going to talk about is really one that you can only take from start to finish if you know how to program or you're a software engineer or computer scientist. But you can use it in conjunction with somebody else who's really good at those things if you aren't a programmer or a computer scientist.
Well, you can always manipulate the features. For example, the words to be stressed. You can insert pauses. You can change the fluency, disfluency, and the speed can be changed, and so on and so forth. Okay, now
the next capability I'm going.
Oops. Okay, I'm going to move on to the second part of my presentation, which is called Spoken Dialogue Systems. It's still related to oral communication, and it adds on another component to at least one more component to the assessment, and that's the component of speaking. I'm sure you have either used spoken dialogue systems or you have seen someone use it. Spoken dialogue systems refer to technologies that allow a human to converse with an automated agent. Where are these spoken dialogue systems used? They have extensive uses in telemedicine. For example, they assist in patient-doctor interactions. They manage patient information. They can be used in consumer services. For example, they automate routine inquiries. Sometimes you call a call center and they pick up, and actually the person that you're talking to is not a real person. It's a spoken dialogue system. But it's interesting that using spoken dialogue systems has resulted in enhancing customer satisfaction in many fields. In language education, they have been used quite significantly more frequently recently. These two review papers can basically give you a lot of information about the applications of spoken dialogue systems. In smart homes, if you have a very advanced kind of smart house, you can use spoken dialogue systems. In language assessment, it has also been used, but the application of these systems in language assessment is relatively recent. What is the architecture behind the spoken dialogue systems? Well, actually, there are several NLPs that are built into every spoken dialogue system. This is a traditional spoken dialogue system, by the way. The first thing that you would always encounter in the textbook presentations of these SDS systems is a speech recognition NLP, whose output is sent to a semantic decoding NLP, whose output is then managed by a dialogue manager. Then the natural language generation starts following this stage, and that's where the NLG algorithm is used. And finally, the text-to-speech kind of algorithm is also used, and then you hear the answer of the agent who's probably answering your question. Like I said, the problem with SDS systems is that they're very limited. So if you have developed them for example, communication about tourism or about, I don't know, customer service, if the caller talks about anything else, I'm afraid they either fail to understand it or they just freeze because they haven't been trained to understand any language or any structure beyond that. So what we're doing now in several studies that are ongoing, we're using large language models and chat boxes like ChatGPT, because as you know, if you're using the subscription type of ChatGPT, you know that it's now equipped with not only the large language model, but also the automated speech recognition technology, the text-to-speech technology. Multimodal AI is pretty recent. and it actually can see you and can see you make faces. It can also see your surrounding and tell you where you are. It's fantastic. And that means that it's also equipped with computer vision. So what else would you need as a language tester or a teacher to develop a fantastic multimodal oral communication test? I don't think we will really need anything else. So what I have been doing with some of my colleagues and my students is to develop some GPTs and to test them to figure out whether they're working. Here is one example which I have developed. It's available on my website. You can just scan this QR code. You'll be navigated to it. I have not made it public yet, so you're going to access something that's not available to anyone else. What we found in developing this conversational AI system using ChatGPT is that it perfectly understands requests. After fine-tuning it a little bit, it doesn't go off track. If you ask for the repetition of the question, it obviously repeats the question. But if you have fine-tuned it for asking only 5 questions from the test taker or the assessment taker, regardless of how many times that test taker asks for a repetition of the question, that repeated question is counted once only. And that's fantastic. We didn't fine-tune it for this. It just automatically decided that it will not take into account the repeated questions. And then if you go off track, it can help you come back on track. This is fantastic. So I'm going to present some part of this conversation between a person and this conversational AI developed by through ChatGPT.
Hello, how are you feeling today? Are you ready to begin the conversation?
I'm feeling great, and yes, I'm ready to begin the conversation.
That's great to hear. Let's dive right in. To start, can you tell me about a topic you're passionate about? It could be anything from hobbies to a subject you enjoy studying.
Okay, you notice that she asks a question and she provides a little bit of elaboration, and that is included in our fine-tuning. So it's standardized across all tasks and all test-taking occasions, regardless of what topic the person chooses. The other thing that you might have noticed is that it gives you the liberty to choose your own topic. And I think this is authenticity. I understand that it may not work for example, proficiency testing, but I also have my own share of criticism about proficiency testing. And I'm hoping that the emergence of generative AI will help us to gradually move on from proficiency testing to formative assessments mostly. Because if you're really asking me, if you want to assess my speaking ability, I would like to talk about something that I prefer rather than something that has no relevance to my life. For example, can you describe a garden which is near your house? If there's no garden near my house, how can I describe a garden that doesn't exist near my house? So here I chose to, the person who's taking the test is obviously me. You might have noticed it. I chose to speak about this.
Sure. I'm very much passionate about the topic of linear mixed effects models and their application in education.
That sounds like an interesting and complex topic. To begin, could you explain what linear mixed effects models are and why they are important?
The questions are short and sweet. It took us a little bit of time to fine-tune it, so it will not continue to give you a lecture on linear mixed effects models, for example. It used to, actually. In the first iterations, it just didn't stop talking about it. But after fine-tuning it for a little bit, it quickly understood it. And by fine-tuning, I mean really by chatting, but through chatting with the ChatGPT itself. You don't have to collect any data and do the sort of rigorous fine-tuning that computer scientists would do. So just let's listen to a little bit more. I'm going to fast forward to this part, just randomly, really.
Grammar knowledge, but also other social level or society level variables such as their socioeconomic status, the socioeconomic status of their peers who are nested within the same classroom as them, and the average socioeconomic status of their school and also their district, and so on and so forth. Now, the effect of this on the interesting.
I'm just fasting forward to, okay. Yeah.
That's a really insightful example. It shows how linear mixed effects models can handle the complexity of nested data, like students within classrooms and schools, which is often the case in education. What challenges do you think researchers face when using these models in practice?
Again, a little bit of feedback here. This so-called conversational AI doesn't really sound like a machine, right? Unlike, ironically, like some human human examiners who do sound like a machine in under assessment conditions, who do not provide any feedback to the test taker, and it's always a kind of one-sided sort of conversation in which the interviewer only asks questions and you only provide answers and there is nothing else. But I think this kind of fine-tuning makes the conversation more humane and more natural, as opposed to the sort that is usually used in high-stakes tests. And now let's move on to the last part of it, where it provides feedback.
You spoke with a good flow overall, though there were brief pauses where you hesitated. I'd give you a 3 here. Overall, this was a well-rounded response. Great job.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so it gives you feedback. If you fine-tune it, it provides you with feedback. Okay, now the last slide of my presentation, and sorry for taking a little bit of more time than 20 minutes. In conclusion, in my view, using generative artificial intelligence allows language testers to improve the authenticity of assessment. Language assessments can be tailored to individual learners just by using available generative AIs like what I presented. And I'm hoping the following will happen gradually. The approach in which we tailor our AI system to individual learners and their needs will support learners in reaching personalized goals rather than measuring them against some unrealistic standards and putting them under a bell curve and things like that. And with that, I would like to thank you again for your attention. And here is my channel, just in case you want to take a look at other videos that are available. Thank you again, and that's the end of my presentation.